languages. In the case of the telephony, in 1979, less than 1 million people had access to telephone. By 2009, it had reached over 25 million. Almost every single household in Iran had a landline telephone by the end of 2009. Mobile, in the case of mobile, actually we have similar thing. Again, this is not a strange story to you, I'm sure if you've heard this mentioned. Mobile has been really, really significant in terms of the takeoff and in terms of acceleration when it comes to penetration to the population. Just from around over 1,000 in 1997 to 2.5 million in 2003, over 21 million in 2007, and they are expected to reach 38 million by 2060, so almost everybody over the age of 10 probably will have a mobile phone in Iran in a year or two. The same significant development can be seen in the case of the internet. A very, very slow starter for so many different reasons: the war, the contradictions, and the dilemmas within the states. Most of the money going to the IDF, the so-called constructions after the war with Iraq and so on. And so initially it started very, very slowly. Within the universities, 2,000 people had access in 1996, reached to 12 million in 2007, and 26 million in 2009. I looked for the latest figure on the websites of the telecommunication company of Iran. They haven't actually given any new figure. I think partly because that might not be exactly accurate. So you have to pinch that, to take that the statistic with a pinch of salt. As many other information that the statistics coming from the developing countries, they're not always that accurate at all. The most scientific voice surveys as such. But that gives you kind of a good indication. Okay. That's the expansion. Who owns it? In what way we can possibly provide a model of control and ownership? Effectively, the most significant owner of the state, the most significant unit of capital, if you could put it that way, when it comes to the media, is the Iranian state itself. There were two significant media firms in Iran back in 1979, before the coming to the power of the Islamic Republic. One of them was called Kayhan, a daily newspaper in Iran, and the company known by that name, and the other one was called Etalad, the two opposing national newspapers. Both companies still exist, Kayhan with 13 titles and Etalad with 11 titles. Add to that, the other, and actually both of them are under the control of the supreme leader. Not just the state, but the supreme leader itself has it runs those institutions. Then you have the case of Iranian National News Agency, IRNA, which, in addition to the International News Agency, they also run their own journalism school, plus 7 national newspapers and publications, which includes the Daily Iran. And they've got other content initiatives, but not really relevant to that. The other, the fourth, and possibly the most significant media player in the case of Iran is the Iranian broadcasting organizations, ARI, with around 9 titles and a whole control of the whole, a monopoly of broadcasting in the case of Iran. Again, in this case, bear in mind that organization is also under the control since 1989, after the death of the Khomeini, they revised the constitutions, and the Iranian broadcasting, which was before that, for the first 8 years or so, was under the control of the three powers in Iran, the representative of the judiciary and legislative as well as executive. After the death of the Khomeini, it was transferred, the control of the broadcasting, to the office of the Supreme Leader. So Supreme Leader also controls that as well. A significant power. There are some, according to some Iranian historians and analysts, there is a different model of ownership that is usually associated with civil society ownership. The reality is, I think actually that's a wrong term to use. Yes, there are newspapers which are owned by private individuals, yes. But I don't think actually we can, analytically speaking, put them into a category of a civil society. The reason is that if you're looking at all the Iranian newspapers which were owned by those so-called private individuals, what they were the district attorney in Tehran, the ex-leader of the Revolutionary Guards, the ex-Ministry of Interior, the ex-Ministry of this, and so on and so forth. So really, unless you have a very reductionist definition of the state, then you can actually put those newspapers under the category of the civil society, because they were closely associated with different organizations within the states, even though they might not have been at the core of the state itself. But nevertheless, a fantastically dynamic media environments, really challenging debate, challenging discussions on many levels, sometimes with bloody consequences. But nevertheless, the disputes, the tensions, and the disagreements, as probably you might remember from 2009 uprising, which was a reaction to the internal debates inside the Iranian state, has been significant, and the number of factors contributing to that, which again takes us back to the problems of the complex nature of the Iranian states. If you're looking specifically from the kind of religious point of view, Iran is a predominantly Shia country, and Shia branch of Islam has a very specific feature and character, and that is the multiple source of power and legitimacy. There are ayatollahs, the source of so-called emulations, and any members of the Shia community can choose which one of those ayatollahs to follow. So in a sense, you have a really decentralized form of following. The idea of the supreme leadership that was introduced by Khomeini of Velayat Faqih in Farsi was an attempt to, if I may actually use that word, to Vaticanize the Iranian religious establishment. That you have a supreme leader, like a pope, and he will determine where things will go, which is in historical conflict opposition to the structure of the Shia, of the Shia religion. That has meant that there are multiple sources of the power, multiple sources of conflict tax collection, and multiple sources of the social legitimacy in terms of the ideas, in terms of the even fatwas, in terms of the interpretation of the holy text, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very important, and since 1979 there have been major significant clashes between different ayatollahs and the supreme leader. The most significant one, I think, was Shariat Madari, which was effectively died under house arrest, and Montazeri, another significant Grand Ayatollah, which has also died, I think, a few years ago, and he spent much of his life in the first decades of the Islamic Republic under house arrest. Add to that is the way that the Iranian economy is organized. Back in 1979, a fantastically wide range of previous regimes' assets were seized. They were not nationalized as such, but they were given to the different boneyards or foundations, which at the moment, according to some estimates, control over 30% of the Iranian economy. These people have a great deal of influence in terms of creating jobs, taking care of the people actually who fought in the war, came back disabled, lost their families, the martyrs' families, the civil families, and so on and so on. They're really contributing to some extent. They are a state within a state, contributing and taking care of certain segments of the society as well as the economy. And again, their investment into the field of the media and cultural production has been very significant, including in cinema as well. The other significant factor that we have to bear in mind that Iran, like all other post-revolutionary states, have the hallmark and the deep mark of the revolution itself. I think it was Karl Marx who once actually suggested, in the case of the French Revolution, saying that the biggest achievement of the revolution was the revolution itself. Revolutionary societies tend to become a very, very complicated, complex societies, and they was. And the excitement and the contradictory energies that they bring to the fore remains there for many years and sometimes many decades to come. Add to that is the dilemma of the contradictions and the polarity within the Iranian state as well. Again, if you look at a state historically after revolutions, it takes some of them decades, but in the case of the Mexico, perhaps, as many people actually suggested, even a century for the state to centralize and homogenize itself. There have been significant conflict trends, significant forces, and as such, again, as the 2009 uprising and the recent presidential election showed, there is a kind of way tension and factionalism at the heart of the Iranian states. We're not talking about the secular opposition, we're not talking about people who disagree with the Iranian states, but within the Iranian state itself, there are different tendencies, different movements, and so on and so forth. And all of them actually do contribute to a very, very engaging, as suppressive it is, but very engaging, very diverse, at least ideas, which is in a contrast to what we had prior to 1979. Once you had a party, you had a king to determine every aspect of social life. The debates in the parliament in Iran, it is, despite the fact that they are basically seats, these are the person who have actually gone through the seats of the Guardian Council in Iran, still tend to have a great deal of disputes between them. And in many ways, if you look at the case of the 2009 election, it clearly showed that not opposition, the other candidates, Mousavi and Karami, clearly were representing a different visions within the Iranian state. They wanted to continue to open up a little bit, they wanted to continue to open up the Iranian state as well as society to the outside world and have some political opening inside Iran as well, which was ended in what is generally known as an electoral coup. Despite that diversity, the reality is because actually much of those media are in the hands of the state, or people or individuals or associations associated with the states. There have been very, very little room for, if you could call it, popular participation as such. Granted, people have always tried to continue to use the fraction and the crack within the Iranian states in order to raise their voices, in order to complain, in order to continue to try to push for certain reforms and certain changes. But nevertheless, they would never been able to have their own continuing voices. As we speak, if you look at the case of the Iranian media, inside as outside, it's either controlled by the states, Iranian states or other states, such as BBC Persian or the Voice of America and so on and so forth, or rich Iranian people who have their own satellite stations outside Iran or run their own newspapers for their own benefits inside Iran. Internet, in the meantime, came in between. For the first time since the 1979, where a fantastic range of pamphlets, student newspapers, trade union newspapers, various company NGOs and civil society associations had their own newspapers. For the first time since 1979, 1980, we've had a wonderfully broad range of ideas and outlets emerging. So internet became significantly wrong because actually presented that allowed for a very, very new voice emerging. And that's what is usually taken for granted and bigged up when the Iranian uprising in 2009 and later in the case of the Arab Revolution was or is mentioned. Probably you remember that back in 2009, immediately after people actually started flooding the streets, there was a chant of Twitter revolutions and Facebook revolutions, more actually more Twitter revolutions. People talked about how the social media are empowering Iranian citizens, how they're challenging the states, how they're challenging censorships, and so on and so forth. For such a long time, nobody really had paid attention, anything, to the Iranian media as such, but suddenly, all the heart was on Twitter. And ironically, actually, Twitter came at a time in which the Iranian activists have been using blogs for 5 or 6 years with wonderful, wonderful style of innovations and energy. And also at the time that in Iran, there were no more than 10,000 Twitter accounts back in 2009. And of those, many people actually claim, many of them actually were based outside Iran. The reason they were associated with Iran because many of them, in solidarity with Iranian activists, changed their location to Tehran, even though they might have been in Brussels or in Amsterdam or in London or Chicago and so on and so forth. What those did as a result of that kind of comparison and hyping up the idea of the internet was to kind of offer new media, as many people actually put it, as the grave digger of the old politics. It was no longer just a problem of the state, or the structure, or the social movements, or different kind of way of dealing with things. It was just simply new media versus the old politics. Again, I'm sure you have heard this before and previously discussed it. What happened, which hopefully we can discuss later, in picking up those kind of the social media was the lack of historical knowledge. I don't know whether you remember images from the Egyptian revolutions. Even after the use of the internet, people started demonstrating, people still flooded Tahrir Square. People still actually went around with a banner saying this is Twitter, jokingly, but nobody actually would come to really pay attention that much. People still remained. The focus remained by the journalists as well as politicians outside those locations on the new media. So effectively, the discussion was reduced to the believers, if I may use that word, believers and non-believers, those who believe in the power of the new media and those people who simply just not believe. So you were either for or against the idea of the new media. You were either assumed new media played a significant role or was completely irrelevant. Pretty much conflict with really problematic binary as such. Before rejecting some of those claims, I think it's important to emphasize that without a doubt, there are significant advantages attached to the internet in general and social media in particular. The most significant one everywhere, Iran included, is the low barrier to entry to the market. This is a very, very significant issue. I mean, we haven't really had that possibility and potential on such a massive scale since perhaps mid-19th century, when it was possible for a group of activists, 10, 20, 200 of people, 300 people, get together, put together some money and produce an alternative, underground, illegal newspaper. If you were in Manchester, if you were in Amsterdam, if you were in Paris, that's what you did. Yes? Back in those days, in the mid-19th century, there were a fantastically wide range of newspapers, illegal newspapers available, which were a significant part of the struggle for freedom, for democracy, as well as for freedom of the press. But since the late 19th century, with the commercialization of the media system as a whole, and the expenses that, or the cost that is involved, it has been really, really impossible. To give you I don't know how much it's going to cost in Belgium, but if you are planning to launch a newspaper in the UK, yes, you will need at least around £50 billion. That's not something that the vast majority of people actually have. If you're launching a magazine, just the initial continuous setup cost going to be around £30 million. If you're thinking of actually launching a satellite television station, quality members of its own and quality productions, you're looking at £500 million and so on and so forth. These are expensive. These are a significant barrier for individual citizens or poor activists, students, workers, women's associations, and so on and so forth to gain a foothold in the market. Internet, or at least some forms of it,